بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
We have to understand that God does not want to infringe on free will. Most of the problems that we have, evil and suffering, are at the hands of human beings. The suffering that, let's say, for example, that exists in the world it pales in comparison to the evil that is caused by man. And there's an interesting interview which I came across, and it was to do with the Holocaust. And the Holocaust was a very, very disturbing event, not just for the Jewish community, but for ethical philosophers. Because at that time, they could not believe how evil people could be. And when they had this rabbi who's a Jewish scholar, and they asked this rabbi, they said, where was God when the Holocaust was happening? And his answer was fantastic. He said, where was man? Where was man when innocent people were being slaughtered and put in gas chambers, for example? So we really do have to put things into perspective. The problem is not God, the problem is us. Now, and the main argument was that because we do need free will. We can't expect to have free will and then God intervening every so often. I mean, that wouldn't be a real world, that would be a ghost house. You know, you're walking down and then God says, psst, you know, there's a nail on the floor, don't step on it, move to the other side. That would be quite a ridiculous kind of world to live in. So yeah, I would add that. So let me go. If God created everything, God created evil, right? Evil is not an entity. St. Augustine argued this very well. He said that evil is not an entity in itself. Evil is a privation of the good. It's a deficit of the good. So it's not an actual thing itself. That makes sense. It's not an entity that we go, oh, that's good, but it's a lack of good. It's a minus of good, if you like. Right? That's an explanation for that. Again, I think there's an assumption, the reason that you're having difficulty is there's an assumption that somehow God creates people that are good and God creates people that are evil, but that's wrong. God creates us in a neutral position. And it is up to us to choose good and evil. He does not create us, because that would be evil. If he created someone that was evil and then punished him in the afterlife for being evil, that would really be nasty. But the Islamic tradition is that he creates them in a neutral position, in a fitra. And the fitra, the disposition, is that he knows, the disposition actually knows its Lord. And by using reason and revelation, we come to recollect God again. So the fitra is this normal state. So that would be a problem if we assume that God did actually create people good and evil. But that's not the case. Okay, so first thing about the unfairness. Well, you see, the question I would say here is, within what scope? If it is unfair from your limited scope, that it is unfair because that person is born here and that person is born there. But in the wider scale, that person will have, let's say, in the afterlife, be infinitely compensated for that treatment. What we have to understand is that God allows us in the world where at best that we will come to know Him. So, again, it's to claim it's unfair within the limited scope of existence is a speculation. You have to look at it in the grand scheme of things. You can't just say it's unfair. How do you know it's unfair? Maybe that person in the afterlife, because of the torments that they went through in this life, will get infinitely rewarded that you won't, for example. And then one could say, I know what you're going to say, well, is that unfair? No? Okay. Well, one could then say that maybe that's the best situation for you, because if you were in that situation, maybe that wouldn't be the best situation for you to come to your Lord. But maybe the best situation for you to come to your Lord, so it's equal maybe in the situation that you're in. Maybe the situation that she's in, and by the way, if she dies, she enters into paradise because she has died in that situation.
it's not forgiving you. It's not really a question, but it's just to help you with what you're saying about, you know, the level of how people will be rewarded. Yeah. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when Allah favours a person, He tests them, right? And Allah has written a certain position for that believer in paradise. And if their worldly actions don't allow them to attain those goals, Allah gives them a calamity, yeah? And with that, Allah is elevating them to that position in paradise. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, Allah gives them one more gift, He gives them the patience to deal with it.
I think just bouncing off that, what we find is that those victims in the tsunami, in actual fact, what you think is them to be angry with God, but it's actually the reverse. The strength and the commitment to faith has been increased, which is contrary to what people would think, right? Because, look, in our day-to-day life, we know that this makes sense. No pain, no gain. Right? We know this from the mundane, we can understand. The point is, why can't that be true of the extraordinary? Why can't that be true for the extraordinary? That in order for us to benefit, we must have some pain in our lives. Look, I've been in that, look, from a personal perspective, when my life has been very, very comfortable, I've taken it for granted. And when I had some hardship, two things happened. That I appreciated what I had before, and it made me a better person, and therefore I was in a position to, when I was in a position to make other people have a better life, just as I had, I went out my way to do that. So these tests and trials that we have in our lives, they are those, for those who've seen the film Matrix, the shudder of the Matrix. Because sometimes we become deluded and we start to believe this Matrix, this world that we live in. What pain and suffering does in our lives, it shakes that and says, wake up. And that's what happens, and that's the point of pain and suffering. As one possible explanation of why we have this in our lives. Degrees.
Are there different degrees?
Yes, there are degrees. There are degrees in the afterlife.
So there's like segregation.
Yeah, there are degrees according to how. Segregation is a bit of a, you know,
how much punishment
that's a bit of a hard word to use. you know, apartheid. You know, I would say there are degrees of justice, not segregation. There are degrees of justice according to how one lived in life. The question is hell eternal? And the reason this is an important question, because our friend here is saying that it's disproportionate. And this is the argument. How can a finite amount of sinning amount to an infinite amount of time punishment? Yes? Yeah. Okay. That's the gist of the argument. There are two responses to this. There is the view, one could argue that maybe as a question mark, that maybe it isn't, that there it is, but this is a fringe view that people have argued that maybe it isn't and it does come to an end, right? The other argument that no, it is, but the question is who goes to hell forever? Who? It is not people, and this will put this into context, it is not people who do not believe. It is people who intentionally know it is the truth and reject. Overtly saying, I don't give a damn, like it or lump it. Those people will be in hell. Now, one could argue and say, well, again, isn't that too much? Well, think of it like this. Suppose you had someone and you said to them, look, stop smoking because you're going to end up with cancer. And they said, no, it won't, you know, come on, it's not going to happen, is it? And lo and behold, 10 years later, he has cancer. And then you say to him, look, you've got cancer, quit now whilst you're ahead. And he said, look, you know what, I don't really care. I do not care, and I'm going to carry on smoking. And he carries on, and guess what happens? He has cancer. And guess what? He still carries on smoking, and unfortunately dies. Do you think that he is responsible for that cancer? Just intuitively, would you say he's responsible? He had all the warnings on the cigarette packet. He had someone, a counsellor, seeing him day in, day out, saying, look, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Now, God, in his infinite power and infinite foreknowledge, has created a situation for all of us that we continuously get these kind of matrix shudders, if you like, and signs for us to do away with our arrogance. Do away with our arrogance so that we can come and know God. He gives us an infinite amount of possibilities that we can actually know him. The best possible place. Now, someone could argue that, again, that doesn't seem to wash over. Well, let's sort of base it on a principle in our day-to-day lives. Do we punish someone differently if, for example, if they chop down a tree, compared to if they killed someone? True? Mm-hmm. Or let's say a third category, an animal. If someone killed an animal, we would not treat them in the same way if they killed a human being, right? Because the being in question is very different, a different category. So why could we not argue that if one is offending, is going against, is declaring war, if you like, intellectually, or arrogantly going against an infinite being, then that person requires an infinite punishment? I think that's quite intuitive. I think the way in which we make those categories, because we don't say if you cut a blade of grass, you should be in prison for 25 years for manslaughter. We don't say that, do we? We make a distinction with the beings. And then one could argue, I'm just saying this is a possible explanation, I don't know necessarily it is the answer, but it's a possible answer, that the being involved here is an infinite being, therefore it equates to an infinite punishment. That's one answer.
Do you really believe that? I would look to have just because I don't believe in God.
Oh, we're not talking about what I believe in. We can have a conversation later. I'm giving you arguments that would dispel your position. It's not necessarily the case that it's disproportionate, because your measurement, I would say, is a false one. Who would say it's disproportionate? And if you say it is evil, you would also have to demonstrate that objective evil exists. But if objective evil only exists if it's grounded in God, then you come around that problem again. You see, where are you getting this argument that it's evil, that it's disproportionate? You see, there are a lot of assumptions there where we would need to engage a bit further.
No, I don't make any assumptions. You are making an assumption of
No.
God and punishment and hell and everything else.
No. There is an assumption there. It's disproportionate is the assumption.
Well, I prefer to or eternity.
Remember what I said to you? I said that there's an argument that says it's not. I'm giving you all the arguments that in response. Well, it's not convincing that it's not eternal. Because that would be convincing, because that's the answer that you're looking for. Because then it would be proportional. Okay, well, we can talk afterwards.
Just, you know what you're saying to him? And he said that you could stay, you do one bad thing, you can go hell all the time. It flips the other way as well, because you could do one thing that's pleasing to Allah, and they give you Jannah.
Yeah, and just to add to that, his mercy overcomes his wrath. You have to understand that God is constantly trying to find ways in which that he can forgive your sins. But I think his discussion is, okay, fine, given that, but if we do have someone X, yeah. This is a very, very interesting question, and I think we need to set the stage here. Even if that all of my arguments fail this evening, or every single one failed, it does not prove that God does not exist. It only shows that God is not all-loving, right? It does not justify atheism, right? I just wanted to state that point. So we need to know the limits of our arguments. Yeah, we'll come back to you. Yeah, I've not finished yet.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll get back to you. Right, it does not prove that God does not exist. Your question is relative. It does not necessarily mean that. God judges according to your environment. The Islamic perspective is our salvation is relative to the environment and the information that you have. So not necessarily the case, no.